At exactly 9:47 p.m. on September 20th, 2025, President Donald Trump made what would become the most consequential social media mistake in American political history. In the private quarters of the White House, surrounded by the glow of multiple screens and the remnants of a filet-o-fish dinner, Trump believed he was sending a private direct message to Attorney General Pam Bondi. Instead, his furious demands for political prosecutions were broadcast to 10.8 million Truth Social followers, creating a digital smoking gun that would expose the complete corruption of American justice and potentially destroy the very prosecutions he was demanding. The message that changed everything began with a single word that should have been a warning: Pam. What followed was a window into the darkest impulses of presidential power, written in the unmistakable voice of a man who believed he was speaking privately to his personal prosecutor rather than confessing to the world. Pam, I have reviewed over 30 statements and posts saying that, essentially, same old story as last time, all talk, no action. Nothing is being done. What about Comey, Adam Shifty Schiff, Letitia? They're all guilty as hell, but nothing is going to be done. The president's finger hovered over the truth button, Truth Social's equivalent of send, believing he was dispatching a private communication to his attorney general. The technology that had enabled his political rise was about to become the instrument of his most damaging confession. One tap, and America's constitutional crisis would be laid bare for the world to see. Across Washington, in her Georgetown residence, Pam Bondi's phone buzzed with notifications. As she opened Truth Social, expecting to see the president's latest public pronouncement, her blood turned to ice. There, for every follower to see, was what she immediately recognized as a private message meant for her eyes only. The president hadn't just crossed the line between executive authority and prosecutorial independence, he had documented the crossing for posterity. The immediate aftermath was chaos wrapped in bureaucratic damage control. According to sources familiar with the panic that ensued, Bondi immediately called White House aides, her voice tight with barely controlled fury. "What the hell just happened?" she demanded, staring at a post that had effectively turned her into a public accomplice in what critics would call the most brazen abuse of prosecutorial power in American history. Trump's reaction, when informed of his digital catastrophe, was characteristically dismissive. "Oh," he said, according to a Trump administration official who witnessed the exchange. The single syllable carried the weight of constitutional crisis, but the president simply tried to shrug it off, as if accidentally exposing a corrupt scheme to millions of Americans was just another minor social media hiccup. But the damage was irreversible and expanding by the minute. Within hours, legal experts across the country were analyzing Trump's accidental confession, passing every word for evidence of what they termed vindictive prosecution. The message wasn't just inappropriate, it was potentially criminal evidence of a president corruptly using the Justice Department as his personal revenge machine. The timing made the revelation even more damaging. Just days before Trump's accidental post, he had fired U.S. Attorney Eric Siebert for failing to bring charges against James Comey and New York Attorney General Letitia James. Siebert, a conservative Republican with an impeccable legal reputation, had reviewed the evidence and concluded there wasn't sufficient basis for prosecution. His reward for following legal ethics was immediate termination and replacement with Lindsay Halligan, a former Trump personal attorney whose criminal prosecution experience was essentially non-existent. The pattern was undeniable and now documented in Trump's own words. Career prosecutors who followed evidence and legal standards were fired. Trump loyalists willing to pursue political prosecutions were promoted. And the president was providing direct orders via social media about which enemies to target and how quickly to move. The international implications were staggering. Foreign intelligence services monitoring Trump's social media and most major powers had teams dedicated to analyzing his posts, suddenly had documentary evidence of how American justice had been corrupted. The accidental message became Exhibit A in authoritarian leaders' arguments that American democracy was no better than their own systems of political persecution. In the Justice Department, the reaction was a mixture of horror and desperate calculation. Senior officials who had spent their careers defending the department's independence found themselves managing a crisis that made their worst nightmares look optimistic. How do you maintain prosecutorial credibility when the president has publicly documented his direct interference in criminal cases? The legal ramifications were immediate and potentially catastrophic for the administration's broader revenge agenda. James Comey's defense attorney, Patrick Fitzgerald, had already been preparing arguments about vindictive prosecution. Trump's accidental message had just handed him evidence that prosecutors could only dream of obtaining. The former FBI director's trial, scheduled for January, now featured the unprecedented situation of a defendant possessing a public confession from the president, proving political motivation for the charges. Legal scholar and former U.S. Attorney Preet Bharara noted the historic nature of the evidence. Motions for vindictive prosecution are rarely successful, he explained, but Comey already had a better-than-average case given Trump's long record of public animosity. This accidental message could be the smoking gun that destroys the entire prosecution. The technical aspects of Trump's mistake added another layer of concern for national security officials. The president had apparently believed he could use Truth Social's direct messaging system to communicate sensitive government business with his attorney general. The security implications were mind-boggling. If Trump was using the platform for official communications, how many foreign intelligence agencies had gained access to American government decision-making? Marco Rubio's subsequent appearance at a White House roundtable, where he was photographed handing Trump a note reading, "We need you to approve a Truth Social post soon so you can announce deal first," suggested that Trump's social media operations were chaotic and potentially compromised. The image of America's Secretary of State managing the president's social media raised questions about who was really running American foreign policy. The damage control effort that followed Trump's mistake revealed the administration's priorities with brutal clarity. Rather than addressing the constitutional implications of presidential interference in criminal prosecutions, White House officials focused entirely on managing the political fallout. Trump quickly posted a follow-up message praising Bondi as doing a great job as Attorney General, but the attempt at cleanup only highlighted the corrupt nature of their relationship. The subsequent prosecutions proceeded exactly as Trump had demanded, turning his accidental confession into a public execution of judicial independence. 5 days after his mistaken post, James Comey was indicted on charges that career prosecutors had previously determined lacked merit. The speed of the indictment from presidential demand to criminal charges in less than a week proved that the Justice Department was operating as Trump's personal law firm rather than an independent constitutional institution. Letitia James followed shortly after, indicted on bank fraud charges that legal experts viewed as transparently political. The New York Attorney General, who had secured a nearly $500 million civil fraud judgment against Trump's business empire, now faced federal criminal charges that could destroy her career and send her to prison. Her attorney, Abbe Lowell, captured the moment's significance. When a president can publicly direct charges to be filed against someone, when it was reported that career attorneys concluded none were warranted, it marks a serious attack on the rule of law. The pattern extended far beyond Comey and James. Federal prosecutors in Maryland and Virginia began preparing cases against a rogues gallery of Trump critics. Former National Security Advisor John Bolton, former CIA Director John Brennan, former FBI Director Christopher Wray, and Senator Adam Schiff. The Justice Department had been transformed from a law enforcement agency into an opposition research firm with criminal prosecution powers. Perhaps most chilling was the revelation that Trump's message had not been an aberration but standard operating procedure. Rolling Stone reported that Justice Department officials, upon seeing the post, had concluded it was likely another instance of Trump accidentally posting a private message publicly. The word "another" suggested this was part of a pattern of presidential interference that typically remained hidden from public view. The constitutional crisis deepened as it became clear that Trump viewed direct messaging with his attorney general as normal presidential behavior. The separation of powers, prosecutorial independence, and the rule of law had all been reduced to a social media conversation between a corrupt president and his compliant prosecutor. International observers struggled to comprehend how American democracy had deteriorated so rapidly. The world's oldest constitutional republic, which had long lectured other nations about judicial independence and the rule of law, was now providing textbook examples of how authoritarianism corrupts legal institutions. Trump's accidental message became required reading in political science courses studying the collapse of democratic norms. As news of the accidental message spread through social media and traditional outlets, the American public confronted an uncomfortable truth. Their justice system had been captured by a president who viewed criminal prosecution as a political tool. The accident that exposed Trump's direct orders to prosecute his enemies had also exposed the fragility of American democratic institutions when confronted by leaders willing to ignore constitutional constraints. The ultimate irony was inescapable. In trying to secretly pressure his attorney general to prosecute his enemies, Trump had accidentally created the evidence that could destroy those very prosecutions. His digital mistake had become a constitutional crisis, a legal disaster, and a perfect metaphor for an administration that confused authoritarian desires with democratic governance. The 9-year-old president, who prided himself on his social media mastery, had just proven that sometimes the most devastating revelations come not from investigative journalism or whistleblower testimonies, but from the simple act of hitting send instead of DM. In the digital age, even authoritarian conspiracies could be undone by user error. As the implications of Trump's accidental confession continued to reverberate through American politics and international relations, one fact remained certain: September 20th, 2025 would be remembered as the day a president's technological incompetence exposed the complete corruption of American justice to the world. The most transparent president in history had indeed shown Americans exactly how their democracy was being destroyed. He just hadn't meant to do it publicly.